It is great to be back. Thank you. Thank you all for participating in our panel this morning. I do have to tell you that General Crawford and I did not exchange our script, but it just continues to show me how proud I am of you and your leadership, the direction that you're taking our Army, and I'm here to support you. I'm honored to moderate this panel, and we're going to talk about executing the network modernization strategy. And for those of you who know me, that's a topic very close to my heart as we continue to support it. At the start of General Milley's tenure, he identified readiness as the top priority, and he looked out to his leadership and said, I need you to do all that you can do to help improve and transform the way the Army builds and sustains readiness. Central to the success is to deliver a network always on, always available, and always secure. This modernized network is key to everything as a service. The network must support cloud computing, cloud solutions, artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data analytics, and above all, the no-fail mission of security. AUSA has brought a superb team together this morning to outline the Army's way ahead. First, it is my honor to introduce our panel chair, General Dave Bassett. As Program Executive Officer for Command Control Communications Tactical, General Bassett guides a workforce of more than 1,600 personnel who acquire, field, and support the communication networks, radios, satellite systems, and other hardware and software that our soldiers require and need for information dominance on the battlefield. Our first panel member is Lieutenant Colonel Dan Crawford, cousin to General Crawford. Yes. Colonel Crawford is the branch chief of the Army National Guard Information Technology Operations. In his current assignment, he is responsible for the IT infrastructure and the services for over 147,000 users across 11 time zones. He oversees the management of day-to-day network operations, and he plans Army National Guard network modernization in support of readiness and civil support. Next is Colonel Bradley Hilton. Colonel Hilton is the senior advisor for the Army Network cross-functional team that you heard General Crawford talk about, a critical member of the soon-to-be Army's Future Command. Colonel Hilton currently serves as a core member of the Network Cross-Functional Team at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, and part of the Mission Command Center of Excellence, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, where he assists the CFT director with the focused integration, and speed, and precision on an advancing key area within the Army's network modernization strategy. Our third panel member is Mr. Jorge Camus, Chief Technology Officer for Global Government and Critical Infrastructure, Forcepoint Federal. George works closely with the information assurance and cybersecurity industry leaders, government executives, and the Forcepoint Executive Management Team to help guide their long-term technology strategy and keeps it aligned with the federal and industry requirements by leveraging his wealth of over 30 years of experience in cybersecurity and cross-domain solutions. And our cleanup batter, no, I got Mr. Sheldon in there somewhere. Hold a second. Mr. Lance Sheldon is the U.S. Army Cyber Command G35 Future Operations Chief Infrastructure Branch. Lance assumed this role this past December. Previously, he served as the Network and Infrastructure Branch Chief at NetCom G35. During that time, he was responsible for the modernization and convergence of the elements of the network. He was able to facilitate a standard update process along with a staff education process to ensure cross-functional support for modernization across all staff lanes. And our cleanup batter is Mr. Chris Smith, Vice President for Technology at AT&T Government Solutions. Chris brings 20-plus years of government and technical experience and a strong background in cloud, mobility, and security to business solutions in the public sector, where he leads a growing team of 600-plus technologists and business developers charged with developing AT&T products and services to meet the unique requirements of the federal marketplace. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce you to our panel chair, General Bassett.
All right, thank you. Good morning. Can everybody hear me? All right, mics are working. As a CIGO, that was always the first thing you want to make sure the PA system was working. It's an honor to be with you today. I think at a critical time in the modernization of the Army's network. I was just down in Raleigh, North Carolina yesterday with General Gallagher and about 450 of my best friends from industry, looking at how we can apply cloud and edge computing to solve some of our Army's tactical network problems. And so over about the last 6 months that I've been in this position, General Gallagher and I have been just kind of linked at the hip. And I'm glad I got to follow General Crawford. I mean, as he talked about his briefing was why to what to how. Over the last 6 months, the partnership with General Gallagher has been about allowing and working with the CFT to better define the what of the Army network, and then bringing experienced acquisition professionals into the team so that we can deliver, show how we can deliver that to our Army. And the how of this goes beyond just, say, writing a requirement and expecting the system to deliver it. The system is made up of a team of teams that have to work together with industry and government and contracting so that we go from good idea to capability, really to enduring capability for our Army. And so yesterday, together, looking at cloud technologies, I was reminded of what's called the Gartner Hype Cycle. Has anybody heard of this? Kind of a great framework for understanding what happens sometimes when we consider advanced technology. It starts with this technology trigger, where people become aware of a new technology they want to leverage. It leads to the peak of inflated expectations. When you begin to understand it better, sometimes you reach the trough of disillusionment. I think sometimes with the experience I've had over a lot of years managing programs, I think General Gallagher often starts in the peak of inflated expectations, and I leap ahead directly to the trough of disillusionment. You then climb the slope of enlightenment to reach the plateau of productivity. When you look at where commercial is today with the cloud, I think they've climbed this slope of enlightenment, and we're applying cloud in really dramatic ways across all of our businesses. When we think about how it applies to our tactical networks, cloud is kind of a more interesting question, where the underlying transport networks that deliver capability to our soldiers are nothing like what we have in our homes and often in our pocket. And there's lots of good reasons that it's nothing like that. When we were in the green room, I was sitting down with Mr. Camus, and we talked about how much bandwidth he had in his pocket today. And so being a good IT professional, he pulls out his cell phone, he pulls up an app for speed test, he runs the speed test on his cell phone, and it came back 70 megabits per second in his pocket. Now, 70 megabits per second, I'll just, a typical satellite link into one of our brigades, for all of the users in a brigade, at JRTC, we allow them 2 megabits of bandwidth. And when we think about, if we're going to transform the Army network and we're going to leverage some of these cloud technologies, we have to provide more bandwidth to a headquarters than Mr. Camus has in his pocket. And so our ability to deliver services as we build up an integrated tactical network, from transport to services, which could include cloud or edge services, to applications that leverage them and provide mission command capability, we have to look at those things together, and we can't just assume that the ubiquitous bandwidth that we experience when we pull our phone out of our pocket exists on the battlefield. We have bottlenecks that are in different places. His phone connects directly to a cell phone tower, which dumps directly into fiber. There's no bottlenecks. The bottleneck is how much coverage he has, how many bars he has on his signal strength. On the battlefield, we have to bring things together. We don't rely on commercial comms, although we're now looking for ways where we can leverage that where it's available. But in most cases, eventually it's going to hit a satellite link that has high latency and relatively low bandwidth. And today we measure that bandwidth as a very precious resource. And to transform what we do, we're going to need more access points with greater bandwidth, with lower latency. And we think there's some constellations on the horizon that are going to allow us to do that. And we're looking forward to leveraging them as they become available. Those satellite systems, however, are a little bit like razor blades. They'll give you the handle, and the money's in the blades. And so the terminals are cheap, the money's in the service. And so we have to think our way through how much can the Army afford, to how many locations. As we've begun to look at the integrated tactical network, the number of satellite points that we're giving our soldiers is going up dramatically. Certainly higher than where we ended up at the conclusion of the WIN-T program, and providing dramatically more bandwidth so that soldiers have more capability in their network transport. And so when I think about the partnership with the network CFT and the work that we're trying to do together between General Gallagher and I, General Gallagher is trying to give the Army the options of what it can do to transform its tactical network, and then it requires us to bring together an alignment of programmatics and requirements and dollars. And that realization that nothing happens until those three things line up is coming to bear as we look at the next POM submission and showing that we have to line up things in a way. You know, money and resources is the lifeblood of programs. And Congress understands programs and funds programs, and we have to give them compelling programs to fund that will deliver on our network vision. And so the experimentation that we're working on is not just about experimenting to demonstrate the art of the possible. It's also about experimenting to inform network design choices. We're going to have a lot of different design choices, both at the lower tactical internet in terms of the radios and the waveforms we use, and we've already made some dramatic changes in that area. We've made different design choices. We've moved away from one waveform over to a commercial waveform that we think scales better, gives us more bandwidth, and operates better in a contested environment. At the strategic level, we're already looking at different satellite capabilities and different mixes of terminals that can deliver better capability, consistent with what our joint partners and our special operation partners are already doing. And we've got an experimental unit called the Army Communications Support Battalion that will be fielding as early as this fall with an entirely new set of capabilities. And we're beginning to experiment with things in the kind of mid-tier capabilities that tie the network together and make it more robust, adding systems like Trilos and Tropo, adding redundant means of communication so that when you're in a contested environment, you can fall back to something else, and doing that in an automated way. Experimentation is not an end to itself, but rather experimentation to inform design choices and then the programs that follow to deliver capability. I think when we think about where we did experimentation in the past, we often lacked follow-through. We'd have a demo, industry would bring us capability, and it would end at the demo. And we think the change now is that it ends in a different network design that we're going to then field to our soldiers. So I think we're postured at a really unique and exciting time right now in network modernization. We've got new radios and new waveforms on the way. We've already awarded the first low-rate production decision on our new Manpack radio. Kind of the next generation of software-defined radios addresses the shortcomings of what came before. We're on the verge of awarding a new leader radio contract, and in many cases, there are similar radios in use today in Afghanistan and across the world by our special operations forces. We've learned the lessons from that, and we're prepared with programs to deliver world-class capabilities. 2-channel radios instead of one, flexible options for our soldiers, waveforms that are important for interoperability to the joint force. Exciting things going on in the lower tactical internet, and the demonstrations in the integrated tactical network and the fielding of those capabilities with the Security Force Assistance Brigades in Afghanistan. Exciting times. By this fall, we will take to an operational test the Army's next generation of mission command for movement and maneuver. Through the command post computing environment, a common set of standards and tools, leveraging available commercial options delivered into NIE 18.2 this fall in the command post, and evaluating 2 new options to replace the current baseline of Joint Battle Command platform on our mounted computing environment this fall. Not next year, this fall. And the money that we're going to be spending on replacing the computers in that mounted computing environment through the mounted family of computer systems, those computers are going to host whatever choice we make. We're postured to modernize across the entire Army command post and mounted computing environments this fall. These are things that didn't start with the Army's program network review. Those actions were ongoing ahead of time. And so when we talk about halt, fix, and pivot, we didn't halt everything, but rather we identified what was ongoing that was good, and we moved that forward. And as we look at where we're going to modernize in the future, we're looking at options outside of the current WIN-T program that we've ended to give us better options to deliver that upper tactical internet, both at the halt and on the move to our forces. And we think there's some exciting capabilities, constellations that are either up now or are going up today that could transform the way we fight. Significantly higher amounts of bandwidth for each one of those terminals that we buy. And so we're watching those, and we're looking for ways and smart ways to bring those to bear quickly, where we should be experimenting with those new constellations and how we can apply that to Army formations as early as the early 20s when those constellations are available. So I'm really excited about the opportunities that are out there. And so when we talked to industry yesterday down in Raleigh, the challenge that I gave them was learn how you fit into our network design. Propose solutions that will fit into our network and allow us to make it better over time. And where we've identified common standards and common products in the area of mission command, leverage those products, extend those products, give me options to replace those products when we're talking about a common framework. We want them to become part of that infrastructure rather than competing with it. And so we're looking forward to a future where there are no more mission command stovepipes. And the first instance of that, the movement and maneuver portion of that, has already been demonstrated out at some warfighter activities, delivering significantly better capability than the CPOF and some of the other systems in mission command that were out there in the past. So like I said, very exciting time. In the area of cyber, and we got a lot of folks talking about that today, I think the most important thing we're going to do is move our security boundaries. And so when we think about what classification we need to have on our tactical mission command systems, where we place those security boundaries is going to greatly determine the extent to which we can share data with our allies. And so we're looking really hard at that to make sure we're not overclassifying those systems. And so in the Security Forces Systems Brigades today, we've enabled tremendous amounts of interoperability and capability by shifting from a U.S. secret-only network to a secure but unclassified network. And so I think we're learning every day what that means and where we can pass data across those boundaries in different ways, bringing a range of capabilities that otherwise wouldn't have been possible, and understanding the extent to which the classification level drove the nature of our design. And so I think we're learning an awful lot. So critical time for our Army, great leaders involved. We just got a new partner in the Mission Command Center of Excellence with Doug Chrisman. Said goodbye to Jim Mingus, who was a phenomenal partner, taking over, I think, today or tomorrow as All-American 6, commanding the 82nd Airborne Division. I talked to Jim about it, and he said, I really would have rather stayed working with you guys. He said, I want to be he said none of that. None of it. Jim has the best job in the Army. God bless him. I think he's going to be a fantastic division commander. I'm excited just to have served with him. But anyway, I think it's an exciting time for our Army. And we've got the right set of leaders working together to transform our network, with the CFT helping to drive the what, understanding the capabilities that are out there, driving the adoption of technology, and experienced acquisition professionals delivering the how of the programmatics that are going to deliver these capabilities over time. So I'm honored to be a part of it. Thanks for your time today. I think we got a great panel. I hope you bring some really hard questions, mostly for the industry people. So anyway, thank you.
Hey, good morning. So I'm Dan Crawford. If you can't tell by the accent, I'm actually a member of the Alaska Army National Guard.
Remember, this is my cousin.
Yes, the resemblance is absolutely uncanny, sir. So I certainly want to thank AUSA for spotlighting and highlighting this topic. Network modernization is certainly an essential component to the Army National Guard strategy to shift from a strategic to an operational reserve. It will ensure the Army National Guard continues to remain relevant well into the future because of, one, by improving the Army National Guard's mission command system readiness, 2, decreasing our mobilization IT barriers for traditional National Guard soldiers as they transition between their civilian life and out onto the battlefield. And 3, it will improve the National Guard's interoperability with all of our component partners and our non-DoD mission partners. The successful implementation of the Army National Guard's network strategy will allow the traditional soldiers to seamlessly move across the duty statuses and will reduce the IT barriers that prevent rapid mobilization in support of both contingency and domestic operations. So key to the successful implementation of this network modernization with the National Guard is our collective ability across all components to address the cultural challenges and our ability to effectively manage the resources and the realignment of resources across commands as responsibilities change in this evolving environment. In the end, the total force IT system we're implementing must continue to ensure the Army National Guard remains warfighting capable and governor responsive, as outlined in the Director of the Army National Guard's vision. So very practical application and example of what network modernization does for the Guard is certainly highlighted in the 48th Infantry Brigade Combat Team of the Georgia Army National Guard. So this combat team, the 48th, is associated with the 3rd ID and the 3rd Infantry Division out of Fort Stewart, Georgia. On drill, traditional drilling weekends, the two cannot exchange data. They don't have a seamless access, so you wind up getting desynchronized SOPs, the standard operating procedures, and you get their tactical SOPs wind up varying, and they go off in different directions. During mobilization, that's when they start synchronizing these two, their SOPs, and all of the soldiers for the 48 have to get at least 3 different accounts in their transition into the war zone. This type of file share completely desynchronizes the ability for the National Guard to mobilize in a rapid fashion, support and round out your 3rd Infantry Division or any of the associated unit programs that we have. The tactical system readiness, having the same baseline across the 3rd ID and the 48, that's critical, so when they go into theater, they can have that type of interoperability. So again, I really appreciate being part of this panel, and I look forward to any follow-on discussions. Sir?
All right, thank you. Can everybody hear me? So being another SIGO, I know it worked when we started. I just wanted to make sure it still works over time. So thank you very much to AUSA and you gentlemen for allowing the opportunity to come here and provide a short update on where the cross-functional team is. My boss, Major General Gallagher, as mentioned earlier, is down in Raleigh, in a technical exchange meeting, and would have loved to have been here, but he has to kind of field all the questions that General Bassett brought up yesterday and then left to come up here. So as many of you know, the CFT was formed initially back on 5 February, and we've been maturing over the last 5 or 6 months. Our initial focus has not changed since that time. We're still developing requirements through technical demonstrations, experimentation, and user assessments. And the goal is to narrow capability gaps and then provide those options, as General Bassett mentioned earlier, to the acquisition community so we can pursue the solutions. One thing that has changed is that as we've kind of matured, our scope has expanded. The initial focus area that we were given by senior leadership was to look at unified transport and interoperability, which are 2 lines of effort within the Mission Command Network modernization strategy. And as we've kind of gained a little bit of momentum, that's expanded now to all 4 lines of effort. So we're now including looking at opportunities in the common operating environment and the command posts. And in addition, we're also looking to partner with the community across the enterprise. But one thing also that has not changed is that the CFT doesn't work alone. It's really a team. It has it in the title, when we work among a team of teams to get things done, and that includes many members of the cybersecurity community that are here today. In the remaining time, just two quick updates on areas that we're working on. One was mentioned earlier is these technical exchange meetings. The one that's going on now is the second one that we've done. The first one was back in March, where we looked at network transport up at Aberdeen Proving Grounds. That one had 576 participants with 204 members of industry, 87 which were small business and not necessarily traditional folks who interact with the Department of Defense. And out of that came 206 white papers of options for the future. 4 of those we graded those papers on maturity. 4 of those were very mature. And we worked with the acquisition community to put them into programs and look for opportunity of growth in the future. A larger percentage of them were maturing. And so those we've passed off to our CERDEC partners to continue development and alignment with future Army modernization. And then there's some that are immature but very interesting, and as a network CFT, we're continuing to engage with those industry partners as those technologies grow over time. The current one is looking at the cloud and distributed mission command, as mentioned earlier. Another beginning a successful exchange, and we'll follow the same process over the coming weeks and months and provide feedback to industry. So these TEMs, as we call them, are not business development opportunities, but really an opportunity for users, and that's why we're close down to Fort Bragg, where Forcecom and the 18th Airborne Corps is at, to talk to technicians and engineers about the problems we have and the potential solutions that are there. And it kind of reminds me of of how you develop shared understanding of a problem in the past, is that to an engineer, the acronym TS stands for Terminal Services, but to someone in the military, it has a far different meaning in terms of top secret. And so the ability to talk past one another exists. And so meetings like this allow us to reach a common understanding of what the problems are and potential solutions. The other area that we're looking at is experimentation and demonstrations. And as mentioned earlier, we're focused on an integrated tactical network that is looking at emerging capability from the SOF community and industry. And I think it will inform those future design decisions that General Bassett mentioned earlier. We're also learning from our exercises and as experimentation opportunities. So at last year at a warfighter at Fort Bragg, and then a joint warfighter assessment in Europe, we learned a lot of lessons about interoperability and developing our multi-nation partner environment. And we're now taking those in and looking at opportunities to experiment them in this upcoming fiscal year 19 exercises. And this allows us to get at the principle of development operations, and so that we talk to the customer as we modernize and get their feedback early on, and bake that into future solutions. So I've been at this thing now for about 6 to 8 months. I'm really excited for the future as we stand up Futures Command, and this continues to mature over time, and working with our partners to modernize the network. And look forward to everyone's questions.
Good morning. My name is Jorge Camus. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Forcepoint Global Governments and Critical Infrastructure. I'm also the proud recipient of a 70 megabit cell phone. The general and I were talking in the staging room, and we're talking about bandwidth, and the whole conversation came up about what can you get on your cell phone. And to be honest, I was shocked that I was able to get that speed. The general, on the other hand, I think you got, what, 2 megabits? So you're used to work in bandwidth limited communications mode. So nonetheless, Forcepoint is a relatively new company. We were created in 2016. We were spun out by the Raytheon Corporation to focus mainly on cybersecurity products. We're based out of Austin, Texas, with our federal headquarters here in Hardening, Virginia. We provide a wide range of capabilities. I'm not going to give you a big commercial, but I just want to give you a little background. But wide range of cybersecurity capabilities to include cross-domain solutions, insider threat, data loss prevention, email, web security, cloud access security brokers, user entity behavior analytics, and the next generation firewall. So quite a mouthful, quite comprehensive portfolio. And one of the key things is since we're created by Raytheon, our DNA is DoD and IC. So we're very mission focused, even though we have a commercial product portfolio and bulk of our business is in the commercial arena, we still focus a lot on our DoD and IC capabilities. I'll talk about two different things or two issues in the Army's modernization. One is cloud. Even though bandwidth is limited, as the general mentioned, the cloud is a key part of modernization. Everyone is moving there. It offers great capabilities to the warfighter, but from a cyber point of view, it increases data exposure and also increases the threat surface. So how do we handle that? It also leads to loss of data control. So once you start taking data out of your own entity and putting it into cloud-based resources, who has control? So we need to take a different look at how we're handling cloud-based and network modernization. Previously, or even today, we look at putting point-based security products across the organization. And we take data inputs from all those point solutions and try to bring it to a single pane of glass. But that adds to a lot of confusion. Alert overload, how to process the alert, how to take action on it. And what we need to do is take a different look of how we protect data in this diverse environment. We need to look at it more from an interaction point of view, how humans interact with the data, how processes interact with data, how entities interact with data, and model that interaction. Because from a day-to-day point of view, depending on the operational tempo, users, processes access that data in a very deterministic way. And by modeling that, using analytics, we can set up norms. And if we start detecting deviations in that, maybe we can start raising the attention on how that entity is accessing the data. So a different way of looking at how to protect data. And if we notice like a credential compromise, which is a big thing today, especially with phishing, we can look at how that entity is now accessing new data sources or different data sources out of their norm, or maybe even out of the time that they do business, and then quickly react to that and block it from causing a major network spill. Also on topic of clouds, I always say it shouldn't be called cloud compute, it should be sky compute, because if you look up in the sky, there's multiple clouds. And the Army is certainly dealing with multiple cloud providers and at multiple sensitivities. Also need to talk to our partners that have cloud resources. So how do we do that interaction and access to those clouds? And many of those clouds are different classification levels. We have secret, top secret, unclassified clouds. How do we provide secure communications that allow us to freely access information at different security levels from a single terminal? And I think that would help on the bandwidth side too, especially not having to put all classification levels down to the tip of the spear. And last but not least, there's technology out there, cross-domain solutions that allow you to take information at multiple levels, relabel it to the proper level, be able to access it from a single terminal. How can you leverage that technology to, once again, reduce bandwidth, but offer additional capabilities at the endpoint? And with that, thanks for the opportunity for being on the panel, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Morning. So what I'd like to talk about is...
Turn you off.
Yeah, right? So I'd like to talk about is how the Army is using convergence and modernization to go after the Army's IT infrastructure, management, security, and data utilization across the globe. One of the key things of how we're doing this is we're looking at basically 15 areas of convergence that are critical as we go down the road of modernization. So like, for example, one of the critical areas of modernization is how we manage our network. And we manage our network on multiple layers. One of them is the actual network layer. The other one's the systems layer, which is the desktops, the servers, etc. And then you look at the security of how we manage it, whether that's securing a device, securing a user with identity management, or securing hardware. So we know that the hardware that we put on is the actual hardware that we want operating our network. And it's not somebody coming in and plugging in their cell phone into our network, and that's not authorized. So the end state, what we're trying to get at, is we want to protect the warfighter's ability to traverse and exercise mission command network through the cyber domain battlefield, with a true end state of any user on any network across accessing any resource, anytime, at any location. That's the key of what we're trying to do with modernization, as we truly get after some of these critical elements that have been impacting our network for at least the last decade that I've been working in a civilian role within the Army. So one of the key aspects that we're looking at is, how do you focus this discussion? So we've been talking about, you have the infrastructure perspective, which is truly the hardware components, and then you come after what industry is talking about, which is a platform as a service type realm, which for us that could be GRSS, Joint Regional Security SAC, if you don't know what that means. It could be data platforms, which could be the cloud hosting environment, or it could be other industry partners, or it could be Army or joint environments that have their own platforms as we lay them across the environment. So one of the big things as we start converging these platforms, you'll see a pattern. You have to start at the beginning of it, which is the actual hardware. If we don't get beyond the hardware and the transport layer, the other pieces, you can converge your data all day long, but if you only have that 2 megabits of bandwidth, you're never going to even get access to that data, let alone be able to protect it efficiently. So we have to get after our transport first, start from the lowest level of capability that truly supports a modernization effort as we go down, and then we slowly build upon that capability. So one of the models I laid out here, which is, it's a paper that I wrote, shows that you take your data and your security and you start focusing on the actual platform. As you move across the platform, you'll have this platform built across the network that is a hosting environment that has the right amount of transport with the right amount of redundancy and capability, which then will allow you to take the next step out, which would protect your security, but then you can converge your tool sets and you can modernize your tool sets as you're converging, which will give you a more bang for your buck, in the sense that you don't have 600 different tools when you really only need, let's say, 300. So we've never been able to do that in the past, because just about every post camp and station, from the Army's perspective, where there's about 284 of them, how do we have every command have their own tool set, their own way of doing business? With our Army Cyber standing up and going after this capability set along with CIOG-6, we've had the opportunity to now say, okay, commands, you are now going to only use this item, and we will help you facilitate that across your network, and we will also help you learn how to manage it and train it and feed it up into the right analytical process to show us our threat vectors that have been coming in. So like with JRSS, the security boundaries, as we close those boundaries, we are reducing our overall footprint and our threat. So the enemy, as you know, the threat actors, whoever you are looking at, do have less available lanes of effort to come after us. But because this is, this is a very long paper, but what we need to do in the end state is just focus on convergence of all these pathways and go after alignment of all the networks that the model allows to show us where we will be in the next 10 to 15 years to truly get after a cloud environment, which will enable us to use things like software-defined network, identity management, and true pathway divergence to allow overall builds of networking. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'll try and weave my remarks through all the great statements that have been made by my colleagues here on the panel. And I think I'll start with the clarity that's been brought by Chief of Staff Milley, General Milley. General Crawford, Fogarty, Bassett, Gallagher. When we looked a year and a half ago and sat down with General Milley, it was an open discussion with industry and the Army leadership and set a very clear vision, and you guys are now executing on it. It's not going to be a simple journey, but today we're talking about transformation and how do we do that in a secure manner with resilient connectivity out there and be able to operate anywhere on the globe when we need to at will. So, you know, when you put remarks like this together, I took a little walk down memory lane. I'm not going to go way down it. A little traumatized by some of it, but you know, think back as an infantry soldier in the mid-'80s and the Prick 77 man pack and landline phones that you cranked, right? And it was Vietnam era communications equipment going on out there, right? But I had the pleasure over 25 years of watching the transformation from that to network-centric warfare as we fielded those types of capabilities out there. And if you think about the operations around the globe in the last 17 years, our capabilities are enormous, they're deep, and we have the capability today, but the world is changing at such a rapid pace that I think this clarity is extremely important because there is no more important topic than our ability to communicate and defend this nation as we move forward. So I'm going to actually give you, I think I'm going to term them Chris's constances, because I talked a little bit about that journey. I've been able to give back as a CTO now in industry. I continue to serve our nation, and we've been on transformational journeys in each one of the companies that are out there. And so these are the constants I'm going to leave you with, and then I thought I'd talk about a few things we need to keep attention on as Army leadership and industry working together as we go through this. General Crawford, you said this, but I'm going to say it again. One of the greatest strengths of this nation is the ability of industry and government and academia to work together. It is the diversity of our people, our creativity and ingenuity in this nation that cannot stop us from achieving anything we set our minds to. So we've got to continue that, and I'll talk a little bit about that in my closing remarks on how I think we can do that best. But that is one constant that we need to keep in mind, and we're going to continually need to work at it as we go on this long march or this transformational journey. The second is that one of the only constants you can really count on in life is change. No matter if it's our war plans and how we take them out to execution, or it's the environments we operate in this country, things are going to change around you. And the change of pace, or the pace of change in technology, is not going to diminish. General Crawford and General Fogarty, you both talked about this, but cloud compute that we've been talking about for a number of years really did become mainstream. And it's not just a cloud compute in a commercial environment, it's our private clouds, and can we take them with us? And the reality is that Moore's Law continues to hold true this year. So the capacity for us to compute at higher processing speeds at lower cost in a lower footprint means we can continue to do things that we have not even imagined today. Not to mention quantum computing, which is just out around the edge of us. So the ability to compute, store information, and analyze more information than we have ever been able to is extraordinary and going to continue to change at a pace that, again, I don't think we have even begun to understand. Start to add on the proliferation of sensors in the IoT space, and then what we've got going on in machine learning and AI, it will continue unabated. We talked a little bit about this. All those capabilities, if you can't communicate them to the edge, don't get you anywhere in accomplishing your mission. So this constant that we've got to have the communication to lash these things together to get it to the edge is, I think, an important component that we continue to keep focused on. And I would add that the wireless advancements that we're seeing recently with 4G LTE LAA, where we're actually aggregating spectrum and getting up to 1 gigabit speed. So folks who are walking around with phones are only getting up to 70 megabit. We're seeing 1 gigabit speeds with aggregation, and in this country, that's roughly 140 cities across the country this year, and then 5G following that. It is going to mean extraordinary things for urban operations, not to mention home station types of activities. So I'm going to shift real quickly into kind of how do we make sure that we keep our eye on the right things, because those are a lot of great promising technologies, but I think it's important that we actually focus in on applied innovations and how do we operationalize that, because the what and the how has begun, and General Bassett, you were talking a lot about what's in flight. The reality is experiments are fantastic, and if you think about R&D in the 3 to 5 year lead time, that's great, but what are we putting out today that allows us to take advantage of what's in place? So if we look at NTC or JRTC out there today, we have screaming 4G LTE networks, but we're only starting to scratch the surface on what we can do with that. We're really more on the umpire side of what's going on out there, but the reality is we should test these capabilities, whether they're wireless terrestrial, satellite-based. We have to be able to operate using software-defined capabilities to move at our own will. Second, it's somewhat in the same theme, but it's infusing new capabilities, time to delivery. So it's not the same as the first one. We've got to apply the innovations as we take this long journey. But we also got to on-ramp new capabilities. I alluded to quantum. Quantum compute is here. It's becoming very real in operational models where it makes sense. But quantum security is right behind it, because the reality is that quantum compute will allow a lot of the encryption that we rely on today in the next 5 to 10 years to be broken. And so we've got to think about, how does quantum get used on the other side of that coin. 3, I think something we've got to keep in mind as we take this journey is streamlined mechanisms to make sure that we keep the conversation ongoing and keep it open and have the authorities to be able to execute on those first 2 things that I talked about. A quick nod to the National Guard, Colonel, is that we also have to think about the U.S. role of National Guard and the Army in the event of emergencies, and that state role with public safety, the interoperable FirstNet network, and then Homeland Security, and how do we do that best. So those are a few items. I'm just going to leave it with, we've got to do this at home station and where we train. You all are well aware of that. But we can begin there today with the right risk profile so that we're training to fight, how we're going to be able to go into expeditionary roles where we're not denied right off the bat, and then seg to those denied environments where we need to move to perhaps other terrestrial or hardened capabilities across satellite. So, you know, the capabilities are out there. This discussion that we've had to get to this point, and now the journey we're on, it's going to be a long one. I call it a long march. There's going to be a lot of hills out there, a lot of firefights, battlefield operations, bivouacs. You know, it is that journey that we're going to be on, and we've got to do this together because it's imperative for the nation. So, thank you all very much.
Well, I don't know if you all were watching as the questions were coming in. We're obviously not going to get to them all. I've got a couple for you, General Fogarty, that I'll pass for later. That's in there. But let's start with General Bassett. With current cyber threats across the tactical network, is there an emphasis on additional cyber testing requirements to the acquisition requirement documents? And are we allowing sufficient time to mitigate those vulnerabilities identified prior to future testings, i.e. LUTs, across the different PEOs?
So I'm not sure that the requirements documents necessarily are the places to put that kind of a process area. I think clearly we're looking at cyber hardening of all of our systems in the future. And in fact, my team, my CIO, has been working with General Crawford on some revisions to the RMF process that put a greater emphasis on really meaningful blue team analysis up front early in the cycle rather than a checklist-based process on the back end of the cycle that we don't think really informs our designs in the same way. So I think that's been a great partnership. I think we're already starting to see some emerging results from that. I mean, we got to make this more about smart cyber engineers doing the critical thinking up front and less about a checklist-based process on the back end. And so I'm not looking for it in a requirements document. I think that we can handle that in terms of the overall RMF process that we apply to those systems and do it in a way that doesn't slow systems down from the field. The best cybersecurity of all is simply not fielding something, and we seem to have gone down that route rather than, we'll always wait for perfect rather than pushing out a system maybe that is less than perfect sooner. And I think we got to figure out the balance of risk as we go down that process, but do it with our eyes wide open because we've done the hard work up front.
Thank you. I'm going to direct this one to Mr. Camus, reference data architecture for artificial intelligence. Given the importance of data to AI and machine learning, can you share with us your thoughts on how to also modernize tool sets, secure data management practices, and data architectures to be AI ready, i.e. tactical versus cloud to the enterprise?
It's interesting that this topic came up because General and I were talking about this earlier today in the ready room. I have a different view of AI. I look at it more of data analytics, and the General brought up a very good point that AI can be automation of routine task. We collect, from a cybersecurity point of view, we collect a tremendous amount of information, and it can be information overload. And that's not only true with cybersecurity, but other data elements. So being able to make smart decisions on how to look through that data quickly in an automated manner could be referred to AI, and that's a must, especially with all the large data sources that we have, the data lakes of information. We must be able to leverage off of analytics tools to be able to sift through that data. And I also always joke that people talk about big data. I think big data personally is just an excuse for not being able to look at your data. You have too much data to analyze. And the data, big data today is nothing compared to what's going to be tomorrow or next year. So we definitely need to leverage analytics, IA technologies to be able to sift that information and give us the right information to act on.
Thank you. Does anybody else have thoughts, comments on that particular one? Chris?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think that, and I tried to allude to this in my remarks, was that there is a lot going on with machine learning and AI, but again, it gets a bit hyperbolic at times. The question is, how do you apply that to the network to make it self-healing, resilient, right? And we are doing that out there today. And then on cybersecurity, I would just add that there's good application of that to kind of zero trust networks right now, and how you're looking at cybersecurity and microsegmentation, where you can take a lot of the behavioral information we have not had heretofore, automate it, to your point, and then apply it, right? And so sometimes that's machine learning. If you're really at the cutting edge, it's AI. If you're finding it out without having the parameters around it, right, you start to seg into that. But I think it's really that applied set of capabilities against the mission set and the priorities that the Army has set, and getting that in quickly and learning from it and continuously learning from it is what's going to be critical.
Thank you. Colonel Hilton, this is over to you. It's kind of a multi-level question. I'm going to give you the first two.
All right.
How do you translate civilian technologies and concepts like cloud to austere and contested battlefields? And what has to change to make that happen?
So I think the first step is these technical exchanges that I referred to earlier, which is where you develop a shared understanding of what the problem is by letting the users who have experienced the problem of being in a contested environment talking to engineers. So an example of an engagement with an industry partner who is developing a lot of new and emerging technologies. Those engineers have never been in an Army command post, for example. And so they conceptually understand what it is, but they've never seen it or experienced it. And so these technical exchanges are one step, and then the development operations, or DevOps, is another means, which is something we do in our experiments, where we bring users and industry together in the environment of which we're going to employ the capability that we're going after, that industry is developing, and have these conversations, and so that we have shared understanding of what it is that we're trying to achieve.
So just a quick follow-up on that as well is, from a technical level, it's also about making sure that applications that are used to a certain relatively benign environment are capable of operating in a less benign environment. That may mean protocols that don't time out when they have to round trip around a geosynchronous satellite. That may mean connections where you're entering and leaving the network, making things more mobile. And so there's a lot of those commercial technology that work great, or that have infrastructure that supports their mobility, that when you try to apply them to a tactical environment, they just don't work at all. And so sometimes we use gateway devices. We've had a series of things like web accelerators that allow more, and if we can do it sort of in a middle box, if we can do it as a service that's provided across the board, maybe we can intercept that so we don't have to do as much software development in every application. So I think that's a big part of what we're trying to do in the Mission Command area, which is, rather than having every application figure that out on their own, what can we do in a common set of middleware services that every application will use, so that we don't have every app figuring it out in a different way. And so that's absolutely part of our plan going forward.
So Colonel Hilton, where are you announcing these opportunities to participate in the technical exchange meetings? Are there sessions being published on FedBid Ops, elsewhere? And lastly, can you share with industry who the team members are across the functional teams?
Okay, FedBid Ops, ma'am, is definitely the place to keep your eye out, because we'll be doing more of these exchanges in the future, and that's where the announcements go. And then, as I mentioned about the white papers, that when you participate and provide these white papers, we provide feedback. So it's a feedback mechanism to industry when you give us your ideas. And we look at those in the various stages of maturity of the technology and where we're trying to go in terms of modernization as an Army. And the second part of that was the list of functional team members, I think, ma'am?
Correct. Who's leading them and who's on the team?
So I don't have a checklist of who's who in the team, so I'll kind of describe it this way. My boss, General Gallagher, is a core team member. He's the director. He leads the team, and there's a small group of folks who make the cross-functional team run. It's about 25 to 30 folks, and they're located at Aberdeen Proving Grounds. But that's not really the team. The team's much larger than that. And so there's a very large supporting cast that's across the entire modernization community. There's members of the DA staff. We partner very closely with the CIOG-6, for example, and our cyber, who have members who support the team day in and day out. There's folks across TRADOC and the Centers of Excellence who provide teammates day in, day out, as well as the acquisition community and testing and evaluation.
So General Gallagher couldn't be here, but he anticipated this question, but he did want me to give out his personal cell phone. So it's area.
So, well, sir, I mean, who are we talking about? So if it's a market research or an engagement, we have our public affairs will be a way in. We have folks who are doing market research for industry, the way in. Get that information to know how to find it. So, well, the BizOps would be a great place to start for industry, and then
there are POCs on the Fed BizOps announcements that you should be able to leverage, and there's great coordination between the sort of the team that interfaces directly with industry between my staff and General Gallagher's staff. That'll get there's a great entry point on those Fed BizOps announcements.
Mr. Sheldon, and you may need some help with your boss with the chiming in here. With the state of conflict nations that we are in the cyber domain, if you accept that we are in actual conflict, cyber attacks are rampant, and you agree with the Secretary of Defense position that there is a need for allies' involvement, what are your expectations from your allies and partner nations reference the cyber domain security defense position? The threat perception threshold is very different for all of our nation partners. How would you address that?
Yeah, I think I'll defer to the boss.
That's really an important point is, other nations see things differently than us. That's another shocking statement of the obvious this morning. And we live this dream. We see it probably not at the component level as much as we do at the cybercom level. What I will tell you is that whether it's conflict, it's competition, which is generally the term that I will use to describe where we're at. First of all, it's you've got to establish the mechanisms to share information. You have to start to be able to exchange data. You've got to do it real time, and you've got to build trust. And as in any other domain, that is one of the hardest tasks that we find as we work with foreign partners. What are you going to do with the data? How are you going to attribute it or not attribute it to me? And so that requires a lot of personal level hard work and discussion, and then setting up the mechanisms to allow you to do that. Sometimes our partnerships, frankly, on both sides are very transactional. We're facing a problem, so think WannaCry, think NotPetya. What you saw was actually very rapid information exchange there because that was perceived as a global threat. It had severe consequences, and what we saw is actually a very rapid exchange, in some cases from very non-traditional partners. Now, that was also open. So it wasn't something that the Intel community found. They followed for a while, and we kind of maneuvered behind the scenes to pull together the coalition to fight that. I mean, actions were being taken in minutes, hours, days, not long investigations. I think the other thing we found is this idea of attribution. We can become paralyzed by it. And I'll tell you, we have partners, and I think this is the best business practice. You got to use common sense on this. And so we have some partners who have a different level of concern about hard attribution. And I'll tell you, it is very difficult. There are some very difficult cases. I can give you high confidence, but I can't. It's not evidentiary proof. And so if we're not careful, we'll paralyze ourselves by arm wrestling over that. So the partners we do best with are the ones that apply the common sense. They're willing to exchange data. They understand sometimes you have to give a lot to even get a little. But I think what we're seeing is that has steadily improved as the command has matured. On my recent trip, well, I'll tell you, on any trip that I take, I have a tendency to run across foreign partners. They want to do a couple things. They want to get access to our education systems. They understand defense is where they enter that, and there's increased willingness to help them access those types of capabilities. You have some that want to go right to the offense, and we say, look, it starts with defense. It starts with security, and there's a lot of best practices that we're exchanging on a daily basis. But this is really hard because of the classification issues. We got to make it a lot easier. We got to make it a lot faster. But I think there's been significant work in the last year. So when you think about where Admiral Rogers travels, who he talks to, now General Nakasone, where he travels and who he talks to, you're seeing a lot more international engagement. Now, industry becomes, in many cases, the perfect partner, because I may not give my trade craft away, but what I'm able to do is recommend, frankly, partners that a foreign nation can start with to build that capability, and we'll push them out to you. So what I would tell you is you have to stay very active in this space, and I think you become a very important bridge. The other one is academia. There's some universities that are very active in this space, and our foreign partners watch where we're doing business, where we're sending students, and in many cases they want to emulate. And universities become a great place because it's an unclassified environment in most cases. They can get the same level and then take that back home.
Thank you, sir. Colonel Crawford, how does the National Guard establish network priorities? Are there competing DoD and state requirements that you have to address?
So there certainly are some competing requirements, but the National Guard's network requirements they're not unique requirements. But the environment in which we execute our mission is different than the active component and the rest of DoD, in that the Army, or the Army National Guard and the Army, we require a secure environment. We require an environment that enables readiness and that supports collaboration with both DoD and non-DoD partners. So it's our DoD partners or non-DoD partners are your states, your local law enforcement authorities that are not always thought of when designing the mission partner environment or other DoD capabilities. The environment is different in that the National Guard is community-based, and our network covers over 2,400 geographically separated locations across the nation. That makes us a wide area network instead of a land-based network like Compo 1 has with all of the installations, and all of our circuits are over commercial circuits. We pay for every data packet that transits between the different 2,400 locations up to DISA or intra-National Guard. So from that point, we do have some challenges between our different requirements. And like I said in my opening statement, the cultural challenges are probably the biggest. And those cultural challenges come from both internal and external. Internal is the G6s of every state are held accountable as these responsibilities shift. They're held accountable for the services that are outside of their control at times, and for the perceived prior levels of service that are expected from their customers or their units within the state. And I say perceived because everybody knows as soon as somebody else is responsible for delivering a service you used to, your service was always much better than the person who just acquired and is now responsible for delivering that. From an external partner capability or cultural change, we face challenges with what I would say assimilation versus annexation. So assimilating meaning our cyber netcom take on the culture, or at least consider the culture of the National Guard and our unique environment in which we execute our requirements, versus the annexation, which is more of a draconian approach to taking over a network and just taking the service and applying your perceived biases or your perceived expectations and assumptions onto the network you're taking over.
Thank you. This question actually comes from our live stream audience, so thank you for participating. General Bassett, is there a role for free space optical communications in the Army's network modernization due to its inherent security and bandwidth quality needs?
So I'm going to assume that you're talking about some of the intraspace cross-banding between satellites over optical links. You probably thought you had me stumped with that one, didn't you? But I think that clearly is something that enhances some constellations. You know, when I think about what constellations are going up or in the process of being launched commercially that may offer that, the two that are most often mentioned as kind of just on the horizon in low Earth orbit with microsatellites are OneWeb and SpaceX. Those are the two that are frequently mentioned. Iridium as well has a constellation. Viasat has a constellation. Iridium has already implemented the satellite-to-satellite cross-banding in the constellation that they've launched or in the process of launching. OneWeb, it does not do that kind of cross-banding and requires a downlink to ground stations spread across the globe. And I believe the SpaceX constellation is counting on those intra-satellite cross-banding links, which do provide for that additional level of security, because you do not have to downlink it into an area where you may not want to put a downlink station and then deal with the latency associated with that multiple downlink. But it's clearly a technology that we're watching. I think the jury's still out on whether what will become the predominant service actually implements it, but it's something we're watching.
Thank you, sir. For our last question, we're not going to let Mr. Sheldon get out without a question there, even though he passed it to his boss there. It's as we're modernizing the network, it's that plane flying at the same time. How do you maintain command and control of an operational network with all the conflicts globally while modernizing that network?
Thank you. So that is one of the primary challenges of modernization. One of the key elements of modernization that General Crawford and his team are doing is network modernization, and right now we're sitting at about 42% of the Army that would be considered modernized and behind one single JRSS platform security. And like dealing with the National Guard, when Dan was talking about that, we have to sit down and work with our partners and our subordinate units to ensure that when we're traversing the security stacks, or just in communications, we have to understand why and how we are communicating on each echelon. So every echelon, when we modernize and converge, changes how we do business. So traditionally, what you would consider Tier 1, which is down with the unit, they're not doing as much for that role as we would now. The modernization winds up converging a lot of that capability and that communication at a higher link So we have to ensure that every one of our partners, whether it's through a document or an MOU or some kind of agreement, understands that, hey, you will now communicate with this body through what you traditionally would have been communicating at the lowest level, but understand that the predominance of the work and the management as we are modernizing in flight has multiple lanes of communication that you're going to have to cross, because you may be sitting at Fort Lewis, Joint Base Lewis McChord, but communicating all the way out to Fort Bragg. One of them is modernized, the other one's not. So how do we do that, and where does it converge? It converges on what we call the Department of Defense Information Network in the middle somewhere, and then it's got to cross back through into the modernized effort at Fort Bragg. So that is a number one challenge, and we have to be cognizant of how we are going to go after that capability set and ensure our partners that we are listening to them and we are hearing them. Thank you.
Well, thank you to you all for your great questions and exchange here. We appreciated your inputs, thoughts, and suggestions. With that, I'll turn it over to our panel chair for closing.
Well, just again, thanks to some great panel members, Lieutenant Colonel Dan Crawford from the National Guard, Colonel Hilton from the CFT, Mr. Camus, Mr. Sheldon, and Mr. Smith. Great mix of industry and government on this panel. Obviously, a lot of experience. We appreciate your continued service to our Army and to our nation and the role that you play in modernizing our networks. Thanks again to AUSA for providing the kind of forum for this professional dialogue, and we're grateful for everything you do. Thanks, everybody.